This is Jarvis DeBerry with NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. I'm here with my colleague Tim Morris for Common Ground. Tim, on Sunday night, a gunman in Las Vegas managed to kill 58 people and wound about 600 people in a matter of minutes. And the debate that's happening in the country now, if anything should change, should we do anything different, and that have some sides saying this is the time to talk about it, and some sides say this is the wrong time to talk about it. What's your immediate response to what happened Sunday night?
Well, so, as you point out, this is the most polarizing issue, or one of the most polarizing issues. Maybe abortion might be a little bit more polarizing, but so that we can't even begin to talk about it. And my first response was someone who has the equipment to be able to kill that many people and wound or injure that many people from a quarter mile away, that now definitely is the time to talk about it. People want to say, well, you can't react to the last event, but we do that all the time. After Katrina, we talked about flood control. After the Oklahoma City bombing, we talked about how do we deal with fertilizers and that sort of attack. Yeah. And so I think we have to talk about it now. The question is, even on the show called Common Ground, is there any?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult situation. I think the issue of guns is different than so many others because everybody who talks about guns and gun bills is going to believe that they themselves are eminently qualified to own guns and as many guns as they possibly would want. And so you have this very strange dynamic of trying to balance people's personal freedoms, which is obviously enshrined in the Constitution, right, and then trying to protect people from widespread slaughter. But even beyond the widespread slaughter, I think the things that we also need to consider are the number of people who commit suicide, the number of people who die in homicides every day, the number of domestic violence incidents, which is a lot bigger problem that doesn't get the attention that these widespread, dozens of people at a time incidents get.
Right. And I got an interesting email from a guy who said, I'm willing to give up my Second Amendment rights when you're willing to give up your First Amendment rights, which speaks to the fact that this is an issue that's crucial to people.
Yeah.
And so my response is that there are limits on my First Amendment speech, and there are already limits on your Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
So can we just look at ways to modulate that?
Yeah, I have First Amendment rights, but I don't have a right to do libel or slander people or
shout
fire in a movie theater. I did see something interesting yesterday in the Washington Post where a guest columnist said that most of the gun bills that have been suggested are faulty in some way or the other. And so it is, I think, a really important issue to get right or to get as specific as you can, but the problem I have is that nobody is even willing to talk, that the NRA has so completely dominated Congress and has so been able to so effectively throw its weight around that you can't even get anybody on the other side to agree to actually have a talk about these things.
Right. So there was a poll that showed that 76% of Republicans were in favor of protecting gun rights. They saw that as an essential right, which is kind of what we were talking about. But then if you started to drill down, 54% of Republicans were willing to consider some law to regulate the assault weapons like the ones that were used in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But because of the 76, they won't even get to that, and with Republicans controlling Congress right now, there's really very little chance that anything like that's going to happen in Washington.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is important to remember is that I don't think there's any one law that's going to prevent every particular tragedy that we have. And I think it is an argument that gun partisans have used to actually avoid debate completely and utterly, because there's no one perfect piece of legislation that's going to solve everything. Right. Then the response is then we shouldn't do anything at all. And I think that if at a minimum we can talk about reducing some of the less spectacular incidents of gun violence. So maybe there is not a law that we can think of that would have necessarily prevented Las Vegas, even though that's debatable. I mean, we've talked about the bump stocks, I think it's called,
right,
that allows you to
basically
automatic. Convert something into an automatic weapon.
Right.
But even if there isn't a one single law that would prevent that, aren't there some laws that will have some type of positive effect, that something good can come out of these things?
Right. Although I will go back to the idea that, so if someone said we need to make some changes in First Amendment, I mean, I'm going to be very skeptical. We don't even want to open that up for fear of going too far. So the same thing with the Second Amendment is that you're concerned about even getting started with that. But, you know, clearly we have something horrible that has happened. You know, the carnage that occurred in Las Vegas, and like you say, suicides and everyday violence. You know, as a society, don't we want to fix that? And I want gun owners at the table telling me, look, you can't, you know, this is a good thing here, you don't want to mess with this, but here's something we can give on. But like you say, we don't even get to that point.
Correct. And that to me is frustrating, and especially frustrating, as we've already said, this idea that this is not the right time to talk about it, or that you are politicizing. You know, when a person of Islamic heritage does something horrible in the world, for some reason it's always the right time to talk about terrorism or changing immigration laws or banning travel from certain countries. But when one of our own does something as horrific as this, for some reason or another, it's never the right time to talk about our politics and changing them.
Right, and so somebody plows a car into a crowd at Mardi Gras or Sugar Bowl or something like that, people are going to be saying, what can we do to prevent that kind of thing?
We would put up barriers at a minimum.
Exactly.
We would discuss, okay, how do we put a barrier between Canal Street and Bourbon Street, for example, you know, at that intersection. But yeah, so I don't know why we can't even have that kind of common sense kind of talk about this. And
I guess, again, so people who are concerned about their gun rights being eroded would say, at this moment of passion and stuff, we're going to overreact. But again, if we sit down and actually talk, and you tell me why I'm overreacting about this, or this is not a good way to go, then we can understand that.
And how many incidents is it going to take? I mean, at just about any moment in America, you can say it's too soon to talk about an act of a mass shooting, or because we're having about one a day on average. And so at any point you can make that argument that this is not the right time to talk about.
Right. And just a few months ago, we had 49 people killed. Now that number is going up, and it's happening more and more often. So clearly the one thing that we have to do is to start talking. And that's what we try to do here on Common Ground. I appreciate Jarvis's thoughts on this, and keep checking back with us as we, without ever coming to a solution, do try to find common ground on these kinds of issues.